I'd like to propose a toast. My son-in-law boomed, his voice ringing through the kitchen my pension paid for, to self-made men. Teresa smiled, but Mary laughed louder. We had a little help too, she said, looking straight at me. Dad was our angel investor, right? At least he's good for signing checks. A deadly silence fell over the table. 40 years behind a wheel, the lonely Christmas Eves pressed into one cruel joke. I didn't get angry. I just stood. I'm going out to the garage, I said quietly. Under the jaundice bulb, I sat down and clicked on the old tape recorder. It was time they heard the real story, not about an ATM, but about two families, a lifetime of lies, and a woman named Celia. I bet 99% of you will hear this, sigh, and scroll past without clicking like or subscribe. Even if it only takes a second, what time is it for you and where are you listening? If you're hearing this, Charles, Mary, Joseph, it means I'm gone. Dr. Hansen calls it end-stage pancreatic cancer. I call it a clock. And the ticking keeps getting louder. There's something I need to set straight. A burden I've carried far too long, heavier than any engine block I ever had to lift. Your mother, Teresa, was a good woman. A truly good woman. And I loved her. I want you to know that. But Celia, oh, Celia. Celia is the reason I was put on this earth. And I failed her. Completely. It started long before you were born. In the summer of 1962. I was 19, working at Thompson's garage, Celia's father's place. I was just a grease-stained kid. And he was the most powerful man in that little Indianapolis town. He owned everything, including people. And Celia was his most prized possession. When I think of Teresa, your mother, I smell laundry soap and warm bread. That's the scent of safety, of a life built by the book. A good life. But when I think of Celia, I smell rain coming and a trace of motor oil from her father's shop. That's the smell of a promise, something wild and unfinished. See, a life can be good without being complete. We loved each other in secret and in desperation. We met out back behind the shop, between stacks of old tires. Our love smelled like gasoline and rebellion. I was going to ask her to marry me. I'd saved for a small ring. But Mr. Thompson found out. He didn't yell. Men like him don't need to. He called me into his office, the one that smelled of leather and expensive cigars. He looked at me like I was a stain on his Persian rug. Arnold, he said, calm as a knife, my daughter will not marry a mechanic. She'll marry a man who can give her the world. You don't even own the garage you work in. He set an envelope on the desk. Inside was my last week's pay, and then some. Call it a one-way bus ticket to anywhere, he said. So long as anywhere isn't here, come bother. I didn't take the money, but I got on the bus. Because he was right about one thing, I had nothing to offer Celia. I wound up in Chicago and tried to forget. Then I met your mother, Teresa. She was kind, gentle, and she looked at me like I was a man worth respecting. We married, you came along. I got steady work driving a truck. Mile after mile across the cornfields of Illinois, I told myself I was building something, a strong wall around my family. It was a good life, an honest life. I almost convinced myself it was enough. Then the storm hit. It was an October night in 1964. Rain hammered the windshield like handfuls of gravel. I'd pulled into a truck stop on the outskirts of Indianapolis, just looking for a hot cup of coffee before I pushed on. And then she walked in. Celia. She looked like a fallen bird, soaked through, shivering, thinner than I remembered. And she was pregnant, plain as day. She told me she'd been married off by her father. A disaster of a marriage to a man who drank and spent and then ran. He left her with debts and a child on the way. She'd fled, too ashamed to tell her father because he would never accept a failure. I don't know where to go, Arnold, she said, her voice breaking. I looked at the woman I loved, the woman I left, and saw the desperation in her eyes. In that moment, all the sturdy walls I built around my family in Chicago felt like cardboard. The next day, I told your mother I had a sister I never mentioned. Her name was Celia. She lived in Indianapolis, and she was very sick. She needed help. That lie, it slipped out of my mouth with terrifying ease. It's like finding a tiny crack in the foundation you mean to patch it quick, and then the crack widens, and you end up building a whole false wall to hide it. I didn't just lie, I acted. I went to the bank and co-signed a small loan in my name for Celia, enough for an apartment and a little dress shop. On paper, I was responsible. A tangible receipt for my lie. A contract that bound me to the old life even as I tried to live a new one. I told myself it was only temporary. I'd help Celia get her feet under her, and then things would settle. Naive thinking. I forgot one thing. I forgot what kind of monster her father was. I should have known he would never ever leave us alone. Mr. Thompson found Celia, of course he did. Men like him always find what they're looking for. But he didn't drag her home. He didn't make a scene. He was more surgical than that. About 6 months after Celia had Deborah, he drove to Chicago, right up to our little house. I was fixing the fence when his black Lincoln Continental slid to a stop out front. He stepped out, immaculate in his suit, as if he'd just left the boardroom. He wasn't angry. He looked at me, then at the house, then at my dirty hands. He smiled a smile that never reached his eyes. "Arnold," he said, in a tone like he was dispensing a favor. "I came to thank you. Thank you for looking after my daughter while she was imprudent. After all, that's a man's responsibility, isn't it? A man's responsibility." The way he said it, it was both praise and insult. He was telling me I was doing the job he should have done and that I ought to be grateful for the privilege. That was our first face-off, and I lost it. All I could do was nod like a fool. From then on, he turned my help into an invisible debt. Every time I rolled through Indianapolis on a delivery, I stopped to see Celia and Deborah, and somehow Mr. Thompson was always around. He'd have a favor. "Arnold, you know your way around machines, take a look at my mower?" Or, "Arnold, I've got a construction contract coming. You're a practical man. Give it a quick look." He made me his unpaid handyman. For every hour I spent patching Celia's porch, he found a way to claw back 2 with errands for him. It was how he reminded me of the order of things. I was the help, he was the master. And I endured it because of Deborah. I watched her grow into a pretty little girl with Celia's eyes. I couldn't abandon her. Thompson knew that. He used her like an invisible chain to keep me tethered. The humiliation didn't stop there. It seeped into my Chicago family. On your 16th birthday, Charles, he sent a gift, a set of pricey colorway clubs I'd have to work a month to afford. At the party, in front of your friends, he clapped you on the shoulder and said, "So you can learn the game of successful men." His laugh was a touch too loud, a touch too bright. The sound of a man trying to lacquer over a crack in the foundation. He didn't say it out loud, but we all heard the subtext. "Unlike your father. I saw your face then. Son, just a flicker of shame on my behalf. And that's when I knew I was losing you." At later family gatherings, he always introduced me as a good friend of the family, not the father of my grandchildren. A harmless phrase that set me outside the circle, a permitted observer. And I observed. I saw Mrs. Gable next door peeking through her curtains, trying to piece together the story of our strange family. I saw how your friends looked at me, the quiet man in the corner who didn't seem to belong. That night, after Charles's party, I went home and opened a ledger for the first time, the old green-backed kind you use to track debits and credits. The first line I wrote wasn't a number. I wrote, the 12th of May 1975. Debt, 1 set of golf clubs, and my son's self-respect. That ledger became my secret companion. I recorded everything, every favor, every sly remark, every gift handed over like a slap. It wasn't a book of the money I sent Celia. It was an inventory of what he took from me. The last straw came in 1977. Thompson approached Celia with a golden investment opportunity about his real estate project. He convinced her that if she put in the shop savings, she could double it within a year. Celia, always hungry to stand on her own, agreed. She poured in the money I scraped together on countless overnight runs to pay down the banknote. 6 months later, the project collapsed. Thompson's friend vanished. Celia lost everything. The debt I'd nearly paid off reset to 0 and then some. I had to start over. That night, I knew for certain. Thompson wasn't just arrogant. He was cruel. He sacrificed his own daughter to enrich a friend and prove his power. That's when resignation died in me. Something colder, more methodical took its place. I looked at my ledger, its pages already yellowing with debts of honor, and realized I wasn't a victim anymore. I was an accountant. and a full audit was coming. He thought he could take everything, money, dignity, even his own daughter. But there was one thing he gave me without realizing it: time, and a reason to keep every receipt. After that botched investment, something in me shifted. The heat burned off and left a hard, cold focus. I stopped reacting to Thompson's moves. I started watching him, studying him the way an engineer studies a flawed set of plans. I had to find the weak point in his structure. Thompson's greatest weapon was his reputation. Pillar of the community, benefactor, family man. Everything he did was engineered to shore up that image. And that was his weak point. The taller and fancier the building, the sounder its footings have to be. Thompson's foundation was poured out of lies. All I had to do was find the hairline cracks. The first crack showed up on a Tuesday afternoon. I was making a delivery in Cleveland when I spotted his Lincoln parked outside the luxury hotel where he had no earthly reason to be. I waited. From across the street, sitting in the cab of my rig, I was just part of the scenery. Half an hour later, he came out with a young woman. Very young. They didn't touch, but there was a familiarity in the way they stood together, a quiet fluency strangers don't share, and the way he smiled that wasn't the smile he saved for his wife. I kept an old Polaroid in the truck. I took a shot. It came out soft, a little blurry, but it was real. That was the first brick in my build. Nobody notices a truck driver. You hear everything. At truck stops and all-night diners, you hear what other drivers pick up, who's flush, who's circling the drain. I started listening for names. I caught whispers about parcels. Thompson snapped up for pennies just before the city announced new zoning. I heard about a contractor driven to the brink after working for him. Nobody figured the guy nursing a coffee at the counter was logging it all in a greenback ledger. I didn't need courtroom evidence. I needed names, dates, stories. I was sketching a map of his dark side. Back home, your mother began to feel the weight. Teresa isn't stupid. She knew something was wrong. She saw the nights I set up, the money seeping out of our joint account. She started asking questions I couldn't answer. Arnold, what are you hiding from me? My silence was its own poison, eating through the trust between us a little at a time. Her very goodness became a moral pressure I could hardly bear. I knew I had to clean this mess up not just for Celia, but for Teresa. She deserved the truth. And then came the birthday card. A foolish mistake. A weak moment. Deborah made it herself, and Celia slipped it into my coat pocket before I left. I forgot it entirely. When your mother found it, I knew. I knew the false wall I'd propped up for 14 years was about to come down. That was when I understood I couldn't control everything. That was when my plan had to begin. Out in the garage, there's an old shoebox. Inside are letters, nearly 30 of them, all addressed to her mother and never mailed. They're the explanations I owed her. I wrote one every year on our anniversary. I told her everything. About Celia, about Thompson, about the burden. I don't know why I kept writing. Maybe it was the only way not to be swallowed by my own lie. When I saw your mother standing in Celia's dress shop that day in Indianapolis, I didn't feel fear. I felt a strange relief, like a sentry finally being relieved after too many hours on the wall. The play had reached its last scene. The weight was about to lift. I saw the pain in her eyes, and it broke my heart. But I also knew it was the beginning of her freedom. You'll ask why I said nothing when she found the card. Why I let her go. Because for the first time in 14 years, your mother was safe. Safe from him. Safe from the lie that had wrapped itself around all of us. Her leaving wasn't a tragedy. It was an evacuation. And I was the soldier who stayed behind to make sure the retreat was clean. The day she left, I didn't follow. Not because I didn't want to, but because I knew it was the only way to protect her from what was coming. The real fight wasn't with her. It was about to begin. After your mother walked out of Celia's dress shop in Indianapolis, I didn't drive straight back to Chicago. I stayed 2 more days. I didn't sleep. I moved. The play was over. It was time to strike the set. Plenty of people would say I ran. They'd be half right. I did run, but not like a coward. Like a soldier making a tactical retreat. First stop was the bank. Years earlier, when the trucking work picked up, we'd had to wade through a pile of paperwork. Your mother signed a simple power of attorney so I could handle company expenses on the road, fuel advances, freight receipts, that kind of thing. She'd long forgotten it, I hadn't. I went to First National and withdrew every last dollar from our joint savings. 15 years of scraping and saving, all there in one brutal number. Looking at it, I felt a sorrow I can't describe. That was our life on a ledger. The miles away from home, the nights your mother lay awake. And I was about to blow it up, but I didn't destroy it. I divided it. I split the money in half. Right there, I opened a new account, a savings account in the name of Teresa Miller, and Teresa's name alone, and deposited 50%. With the other half, I drove to the bank that held Celia's note and paid it in full, principal and interest. I took back the guarantee with my signature on it. They're here in this box. The receipt for your mother's deposit and the bank's letter confirming Celia's debt was satisfied. That's how I quit. I didn't just vanish. I made sure the two women I'd hurt most had a fair start without me and without debt. Then I headed back to Chicago. I came home while you kids were at school. The house was quiet. I walked past the family pictures and didn't let myself look long. The pain was too much. I took a few changes of clothes, the greenback ledger, and the box of unsent letters. I left everything else, house, furniture, the old pickup for your mother. Before I left town, I did one last thing. I stopped at the post office. I mailed a plain brown envelope, no return address, to Mrs. Thompson. Inside was not a single word, just the blurry Polaroid I'd taken in Cleveland and a copy of that hotel bill I'd gotten through a friend. I didn't need to make an accusation. Silence can be louder than a shout. Their divorce afterward was noisy. That was the first brick I pulled from his empire. Then I climbed into my rig and drove. No grand plan, just west. In Flagstaff, Arizona, I sold the truck for cash. I used the money to buy a beat-up car and started over as Arthur Miller, a plain name, an invisible one. I had to disappear. Completely. It was the only way. If Thompson could find me, he wouldn't just come after me. He'd hurt Teresa, hurt Celia, hurt all of you to make me bleed. My absence, my complete erasure, was the last shield I could raise over you. Driving out of Flagstaff, I felt a bitter kind of peace. I had done part of my duty. The prize was everything I loved. My name, my family, my children. I thought that was the end of it. I thought I'd accounted for every angle, punished the guilty, provided for the ones I loved, and accepted a lifetime of solitude. I was wrong. I underestimated his cruelty. Thompson wasn't the quitting kind. And he had one last weapon, the one I never anticipated. You. In those early years underground, I felt a kind of counterfeit peace. I worked as a handyman in New Mexico, honest manual labor. I lived in a small apartment where no one knew my name. I told myself I'd cut the past loose. I was wrong. You don't cut loose the past. You just hope it doesn't find you. I kept in touch with a few old trucker friends. They were my eyes and ears. Through them, I heard your mother and Celia had opened a clothing shop together. I smiled when I got that news. I was happy for them. I thought they were finally free. Then the reports started to change. About 2 years after I left, a friend told me Thompson, fresh off that loud divorce, had begun to reappear. He didn't go after Celia. He set his sights on your mother. He came by the house with expensive presents for you. He played the contrite grandfather, the man who wanted to make it up to the grandchildren who lost their father. I heard he paid your college tuition, Charles. I heard he bought you your first car, Mary, a red Mustang. I heard he promised you a position in his company, Joseph. Hearing all that, I didn't feel jealous. I felt a chill run down my spine. He wasn't giving. He was investing. He was buying you with everything he knew I could never give you. And it worked. You were young, hungry for a father figure, for a successful man to admire. You didn't know the truth. To you, Thompson was a savior, a generous grandfather. And me, I was a fading memory. The man who'd walked away. One Christmas, Charles called me from the Aspen vacation house Thompson had bought. He found my number through an old buddy. His voice was full of that practiced pride, the tone of a man trying to convince himself. Dad, Grandpa is incredible. I wish you could see our life now. He talked about his success, about Grandpa's generosity. The way he said, Grandpa had a near religious reverence. He never asked if I had enough money to turn on the heat. After graduation, Charles went to work for Thompson's firm. Mary, with seed money from him, opened her own boutique. Joseph, the minute he was old enough, was handed a management job he never trained for. From a distance, I watched the trap tighten a trap made of gold. Sitting here now, I know for certain what I only suspected then. It wasn't help. It was a dead snare. Thompson is a seasoned businessman. He doesn't give anything for free. For every dollar he funneled to you, gifts, investments, he made you sign something. A private family promissory note, a capital contribution agreement, harmless looking documents that bound you to him. He turned my children into debtors, employees, dependents. He took my family from me, and now he was stealing your future. That was his real revenge, not aimed at me, but at my legacy. For years I lived inside that helplessness. What could I do show up and announce that the man giving you everything was a devil? You wouldn't have believed me. You'd have hated me more. So I kept quiet. I kept watching, kept writing in the ledger, my insides burning with a cold rage. Then, 2 months ago, Dr. Hansen gave me the diagnosis. It wasn't a death sentence. It was a clock. It told me how much time I had left to finish this, to smash the trap he built and hand you back your real inheritance. Not money, freedom. He built a kingdom on lies and paper shackles. He thinks those walls can be breached. But he forgot one thing about an old engineer who spent a lifetime with concrete and rebar. We don't swing sledgehammers. We find the hairline crack the weakness in the structure. And with one well-placed shove, the whole thing comes down. To take down a man like Thompson, you can't come at him with feelings. You can't wave around stale personal secrets. He'll wriggle out of it, recast himself as a victim. No, to topple a builder, you use the building. You prove his foundation is rotten, literally. In the corner of my garage sits a cardboard tube that's been gathering dust for 30 years. I've carried it with me through too many towns and too many shabby apartments. Inside is my real legacy, not the one I hope to leave you, but the one Thompson tried to bury. I unrolled a yellow drawing across the concrete floor. The smell of old paper and ink rose up painfully familiar. It was a plan set for the Thompson Community Wing at St. Jude Hospital, building 1985, the jewel in his crown. The project that turned him from a rich businessman into a revered philanthropist. The thing that scrubbed him clean after his messy divorce. And I was the structural engineer on that job. It was good work, the best I'd had since starting over. I worked under another name, of course. No one knew who I really was. To them, I was just a quiet, competent old engineer. I remember the day I presented the geotechnical report to Thompson and the project board. The soils on that site were weak, riddled with peat pockets. I recommended a deep mat foundation more expensive, but it would keep the building sound for the long haul. I'll never forget the way Thompson looked at me. He clapped my shoulder and flashed that too bright smile men like him wear when they're used to giving orders and looking down on people. Arnold, he said, dragging out my old name on purpose, to remind me of the past. You worry about bolts and widgets. Let me handle the big picture. In front of everyone, he chose a cheaper route, a shallow pile and footing system. He called it saving money for the community. I knew it meant more money in his pocket. No one pushed back. Who argues with the biggest donor? My recommendation was brushed aside and logged in the minutes. But before I walked out, I kept a copy of the original geotech report and my drawings. Professional pride. Now, under the jaundiced garage light, I pointed to a spot on the plan right beneath the primary load-bearing wall. Here, I whispered into the recorder. Here's the flaw. IMC might be. I laid it out in dry technical terms. Differential settlement over the years. Micro stresses accumulating in the concrete frame. Hairline cracks too fine for the eye to catch spidering through the main columns. People look at the Thompson Wing and see a monument to charity. I look and see a 0.7-degree error in the settlement calculations. Small on paper. Over decades, it loads the girders beyond what they can bear. A concrete time bomb. And I know exactly how to arm it. I thumbed through an old, yellowed address book until I found a name. Michael Big Mike Kowalski. He was the site superintendent on that job. Big man, straight shooter, the kind Thompson liked to belittle. I dialed. Mike picked up on the second ring, his voice still gravel over stone. I didn't need to explain much. I gave him my real name and reminded him of the meeting 30 years ago. Silence on the line, then a long, weary sigh. I knew it, Mike said. I knew that bastard took the cheap way out. I've checked those cracks every year. They're getting worse. I need an independent geotechnical report, Mike, I said. Official. Another pause. Then a short, humorless laugh. He's throwing a 20th anniversary celebration for that building next month, right? Big party in the main atrium. Press all over the place. Click. I set the phone down. I didn't think I'm going to destroy him. I thought, an independent geotech report. That's all it takes. The first move was on the board. I bet 99% of you will hear this, sigh, and scroll past without clicking, like or subscribe. Even if it only takes a second, what time is it for you, and where are you listening? A week after that call, Mike sent me a manila envelope. No letter, just printout screens from an ultrasonic scanner. Jagged bands of blue and red that looked like a storm front colliding on a weather map. But to an engineer, they were sunrise clear. The red lines were cracks, voids. The concrete was failing from the inside out. Mike had done his part. He and an old hand from maintenance slipped in on a Saturday night under the pretense of checking the HVAC. The first domino was on the table. Now it was my turn. I'm no whiz with computers, but I know my way around a public library. I sat at an ancient terminal and drafted an email anonymous. I didn't send it to the local paper. That's amateur hour. I sent it straight to the legal department at Federated Mutual, the insurer for Street Jude. The email didn't accuse anyone of anything. It was just a technical question. Dear Risk Assessment Department, I am conducting a study of 1982nd era construction. Could you confirm whether your policy on the Thompson Community Wing includes coverage for structural failure arising from original foundation design error, specifically non-compliance with recommendations in Geotechnical Report No. 24B? Boring words. But I know insurance companies. They don't believe in goodwill. They believe in risk tables. I just handed them a multi-million-dollar risk. The second domino slid into place. The last domino needed a voice one that couldn't be waved off. I followed the news for years. There's a young investigative reporter at the Indianapolis Star named Sarah Jenkins, known for being relentless and unafraid. 3 years back, she blew open a story about a contractor cutting corners. I remembered Thompson sneering in an interview, calling her a sensationalist. He'd made his own enemy. All I did was arm her. I mailed a packet to the newsroom. A copy of my original 1985 geotech report, Mike's ultrasonic images, and a single note. Ask Mr. Thompson about Report 24B and next month's anniversary celebration. Ask him why he chose the cheaper path. I thought back to the building's dedication. Thompson stood at the podium bragging that his decision had saved the hospital millions. I wondered what $1 million was worth weighed against the safety of thousands of patients and staff. Last week, Charles called. He'd received a Golden Boss invitation, the 20th anniversary of the Thompson Wing. His voice had that bright, brittle pride of someone trying to convince himself. Dad, Grandpa's being honored as philanthropist of the decade. The mayor's coming. I wish you could be there. I was quiet a moment. I could hear jazz bleeding through on his end, some elegant restaurant. The life Thompson bought him. I'll be there in my own way, son, I said. And that was that. Everything set. I sat in the garage, wiping down my tools. The recorder kept running. I didn't feel triumphant. Not joyful. Just a strange, level peace. The peace of a tradesman who's finished the hard part. Every piece is where it needs to be. All it takes now is a little breeze. The funny thing is, Thompson will walk onto that stage believing it's the brightest night of his life. He'll look out at my children, in the front row his living trophies, proof of his generosity. He won't know he's standing on the foundation about to give way, literally. I wasn't there, of course. I heard it all the next day from Big Mike and read the carefully hedged stories that followed. Mike told it with a satisfaction he couldn't quite hide. He said it was like watching a controlled demolition. At first, everything looks normal. Then you hear a soft little crack, RCK, and the entire structure folds in on itself. It was supposed to be Thompson's night of glory. Flashbulbs everywhere. The mayor, the big donors, and, of course, my family. Charles, Mary, Joseph, front row center. He's living trophies. Mike said. Thompson stepped onto the stage, chest out, a Roman emperor in a tux. He accepted the Philanthropist of the Decade plaque and launched into his speech. All the usual bromides about serving the community and building a legacy for the next generation. The irony was almost obscene. Then came the Q&A. The first few questions were fluff, pure flattery. And then a young reporter stood up, Sarah Jenkins. She looked almost harmless in her blazer. "Congratulations, Mr. Thompson," she said, clear and professional. Sarah Jenkins, Indianapolis Star. "Just one quick question about Technical Report 24B concerning this building's foundation. Can you comment on why engineer Arnold Miller's recommendation was rejected?" Mike said the room went dead still. Not polite, quiet, tight, braced quiet, the kind you hear when a crowd realizes they're watching a car crash in slow motion. My name, buried for nearly 30 years, suddenly ran out in the heart of Thompson's little empire. Thompson's smile froze. It didn't vanish. It died on his face. Under the lights, sweat beaded on his forehead like fake diamonds. I don't recall that detail," he stammered. "It was a long time ago. We've always been in full compliance." He tried to wave it off, but it was too late. The first domino had fallen. Right then, in the front row, a well-dressed man, Mike, recognized him as a vice president from Federated Mutual, rose quietly and handed a thick folder to the hospital director beside him. Mike watched the director open it, eyes skimming fast, his color draining from healthy pink to paper white. Phones started buzzing in pockets up and down the aisle, probably messages from people watching the live stream. The digital squall had made landfall. Thompson saw it, panic spreading like an oil slick. He tried to smile again, but it looked like a wince. "It was just a routine business decision," he said, voice slipping. "We saved the hospital millions." No one was listening anymore. Every eye had swung to the front row, where a family tragedy was taking shape. Charles, my eldest, the one who'd always idolized Thompson, stood up, face ashen, lost. "Grandpa," he said, voice trembling loud enough for the room to hear. "What is she talking about? Arnold Miller? That's my father?" That was the coup de grace. Not the reporter's question, not the insurer's folder. The naive, hurt question from the very grandson he spent years buying had confirmed everything. It turned a technical suspicion into a public family scandal. Thompson looked at Charles. "For a heartbeat," Mike said. The armor fell away. No patriarch, no mogul, just a frightened old man, cornered by his own weapon. He couldn't answer, his mouth open, but no sound came. The show was over. The greatest performance of his life ended in silent humiliation. I didn't feel triumph hearing Mike's play-by-play. I felt a deep sadness picturing Charles's face. I knew my victory was also the collapse of my son's world. I'd freed him, and I hurt him. They say Charles tried to step onto the stage to steady him. Thompson slapped his hand away, a bitter, angry swat. For the first time in their lives, my children saw who he really was. The question is, when the curtain finally falls, what will you do? I could only imagine what came next. The chaos. The phones lighting up. The Indianapolis Star blasting a banner headline across the front page. Thompson stepping down from every board, vanishing from public view. An empire built on reputation collapsing in a single night. I'd made arrangements with an old lawyer in Santa Fe, a decent man I trust. I left him everything, the recorder, the tapes, the ledger, the shoebox of unsent letters, and my final instructions. Doctor. Henson's letter confirming the diagnosis was in there too. My directions were simple. When you hear Thompson has fallen, send the package to my eldest son, Charles Miller. I pictured the moment Charles received it. A heavy, nondescript cardboard box. Maybe he thought it was a belated condolence gift. Then he opens it. He sees my battered recorder, the carefully labeled reels, the frayed greenbacked ledger. I know my kids. I knew they sit down together, Charles, Mary, and Joseph. Maybe in the old living room their mother fought so hard to keep. Skeptical at first, sure. But then Charles would press play, and they'd hear my voice. A voice they'd almost forgotten, rough with age and illness. They'd hear the whole story, for the first time. Not Thompson's version, not the neighbor's whispers. The naked, unadorned truth. They'd hear about Celia and the love we weren't allowed. They'd hear about a lie born of desperation. They'd hear about manipulation, the small humiliations, the weight I carried in silence. Then they'd open the ledger. That's when their world would really tilt. They wouldn't just see lines about golf clubs and barbed remarks. They'd see numbers, cold, merciless numbers, copies of the bank guarantee, the paperwork for the can't-miss investment Thompson conned Celia into signing. And then they'd find what they never expected. They'd see the transfer receipt dated the day I disappeared, money wired into their mother's account. They see the letter confirming Celia's shop note was paid in full. They'd realize their father didn't run off empty-handed. He left only after making sure everyone was safe. I can almost see Mary start to cry. She's always been the tender one. But it wouldn't be pity for Grandpa. It would be shame. All of it. I can hear her sob. My car, Charles's tuition, everything we had, it was part of it. Part of the trap. Skepticism would harden into anger. But that anger wouldn't be aimed at me anymore. It would swing toward Thompson and then, more painfully, toward themselves. For being naive, for swallowing a glittering fairy tale so easily. That's the first step to growing up, isn't it? Learning that monsters don't always look like monsters. Sometimes they look like a generous grandfather. On the last page of the ledger, I left one more thing. A name and a phone number. Deborah Vance. I knew Charles, being who he is, would call. He'd feel he had to. I can imagine that call. The awkward start. Two strangers joined by the guilt of two men. What does Charles say? Hi, I'm your brother. And what does Deborah say back? That call to Deborah changed everything. I know it did. Because for the first time, they weren't just hearing their father's story. They began piecing together the shards of a family they never knew was theirs. Another branch, left behind, wounded too. And so the truth, at last, began its long, stubborn work of making things whole. I bet 99% of you will hear this, sigh, and scroll past without clicking like or subscribe. Even if it only takes a second. What time is it for you, and where are you listening? If you've made it this far, it means everything is over. My clock is about to stop. I don't have much strength left, but there are a few last things I need to say. I won't talk about Thompson. His story is finished. The legacy he molded together with lies has shown its cracks to the world. I want to talk about you, Charles, Mary, Joseph. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I wasn't there to watch you grow up. I'm sorry for every ball game, every school recital I missed. I'm sorry I let another man teach you how to drive, how to tie a tie, but I need you to understand, my absence wasn't abandonment. It was protection. The only way to keep you safe from my war was to make sure you didn't know a war was being fought. My legacy isn't money or houses. Thompson tried to buy you with those. No, my legacy is choice. Now you are free. Free of invisible debts, free of counterfeit gratitude, free to choose your own lives, unbound by someone else's lies. Build something that lasts. Build something true. There is one last thing. When I sold the truck in Arizona all those years ago, I kept a little cash back. I opened a small trust in all three of your names. It isn't much, just a few $1,000s. But it's mine. It's honest money, earned in sweat and miles. It isn't tied to anyone else. Use it to do something together. A trip, or simply a dinner. A dinner as brother and sister. To Teresa, if in some way you hear these words, thank you. Thank you for giving me a family. Thank you for being a wonderful mother to our kids. I'm sorry for my silence. That was my greatest mistake. I thought I was protecting you, but all I did was push you away. You deserve the truth from the start. And to Celia, my first love, I'm sorry I wasn't strong enough to stay. I'm sorry I let your father steer our lives. I hope that somewhere you found peace. That's it now. Every debt entered. The ledger closed. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking for understanding. Take care of one another. The story doesn't end in that dusty garage in New Mexico. It ends somewhere else. It ends in the living room of the Chicago house where Teresa raised 3 kids on her own. Charles, Mary, and Joseph sit there in heavy quiet after the last tape clicks to a stop. The green-backed ledger rests on the coffee table between them. Across from them, in the old armchair, sits Deborah. She drove through the night from Indianapolis after Charles's call. She has Celia's eyes. but the steadiness of someone who learned early to stand on her own. The silence is awkward. They are strangers stitched together by a painful history. Four people who should have been siblings, raised in two different worlds. Mary is the first to break the stillness. She slides a box of old photos toward Deborah. Your mom, did she look like this? She asks softly. Deborah studies the picture of a laughing young woman and nods, eyes shining. Yes, she says. That's her. They start looking through the photos. Pieces of two parallel lives. Birthday cakes, summer trips, smiling faces that never knew the others existed. There are no sweeping embraces, no easy absolution. Healing doesn't play like a movie. It's slow, awkward work. It begins with a question, a photograph, a shared admission of hurt. Charles looks down at the ledger, at his father's meticulous lines. He no longer sees a man who left. He sees an engineer, a methodical soul who fought a long, quiet war. He looks up not at his siblings, but at Deborah. In his book, he says, his voice steady for the first time. There's an address for a carpenter in Gary, Indiana. Someone Thompson cheated on a job. Maybe. He hesitates, then finishes. Maybe we should start there. The room stays silent, but it's no longer the silence of awkwardness. It's the silence of a beginning. The door has been left open, and outside, a new day is starting.